So speaking of that support, do you see a difference in the needs of survivors in Isle of Wight, particularly it being a rural area, compared to maybe a non-rural or more urban area too? How does that look different in the services you might provide, or just the difference in promoting that awareness too?
Definitely. Isle of Wight is a very huge county, right? There's so much square mileage, and there's a lot of people who live in the county too, right? Especially closer to, Smithfield and Carrollton, and there's a lot of people who live in Windsor as well, or, even areas like Carsville, right? There's a lot of people, right, in one little centralized location, but there's also so many people that are throughout the rest of the county because we border up against Southampton and Surrey, and Suffolk, and so trying to reach every single person, of course, it's very difficult. And as you guys know, even with being in an urban area, it's very difficult to do too. So when we look at rural areas, they people who live in rural areas don't always have the same access to resources that urban people do because transportation is such a big barrier. We really don't have public transportation available in the county, and that actually translates into receiving emergency services as well. Our law enforcement and our emergency services, they're wonderful. They're awesome. They're amazing. They do whatever they can when they can, and a lot of times it's just a matter of distance, and we see that a lot, especially in sexual assault cases, because people, if they're choosing to go to the hospital to receive that kit testing or to see a doctor, things like that, um, depending on which hospital has a SANE available at the time, which is a sexual assault nurse exam, right? They might be sitting in the ambulance for 45 minutes to get where they need to go. And so that's one of the biggest barriers, and for children, right? If they're normally going to CHKD, they've got to go from Isle of Wight to Norfolk. And so that is really one of the biggest things that we can barriers that we can see. And we know that our healthcare systems are doing what they can. And we know that there are nurses out there who are in the middle of training and that they want to, help survivors of sexual assault. And it's a lot of training for good reason, but it just takes time. And so, when we have a shortage of nurses because they are getting that training, it still presents, sort of a barrier. And we also see, that residents don't necessarily have access to internet or, public internet, right? They can't get to a library super easily, even though there are libraries in the county, they just can't get there because of that transportation. And also, because it's rural, right? In some of the most rural areas, people, might not have a neighbor for a good mile. And so if they, need to call them for help, or, they need to try and get to them for some reason or another, they can't. It takes them a while. They can't just have that quick access of being able to run over and bang on the door, somebody's breaking into my house. And by the time, that they call 911, it's the time, it's the distance. And so it's us trying to figure out how we can work with our community partners and how we can work with individuals in the community to address those barriers.
Yes, definitely. I think you touched on some really great points, and I know that, like you said, it looks different, for urban and rural areas, and especially the community aspect. There it's a small community of people, maybe necessarily, but that land distance. So that time to have that access to services, or like you said, that time frame of when someone will arrive, or how long it may take to get to the hospital, or the closest nurse, the closest anything that's available. So that brings out a lot of good things. And I think that, like you also just mentioned, even during this time that we're having to stay physically, isolated and away from each other, and we're having these new innovative ways of technology. So to be able to communicate and kind of have that real time communication. And I know that through sometimes the lack of internet or access to those public things can be another barrier as well too. So definitely working on that, and like you said, all those trainings and continuing to improve upon that, and allowing us to be a support. I know both of us work together a lot, and we have no problem coming out to Isle of Wight at any time. So